Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again for the Delhi Bird Talk series. Today, we have a talk by Ashish Piti, who's giving a talk on The Written Bird, a journey into ornithological bibliography. Most of you would be familiar with Ashish because he's also given one of our previous talks, which was about the joys of old fashioned bird watching, or analog birding, as he calls it. Before we start with the talk, we can just go over a couple of announcements. The first one being one of our partners for these talks is Sanctuary Nature Foundation. And all viewers of the Delhi Bird Talks are entitled to 1 year free subscription to the digital version of Sanctuary Asia magazine or Sanctuary Asia Cubs Kids magazine. So in order to avail your free digital subscription, you can just visit the Delhi Bird Foundation website. The link is given here. It's www.delhibirdfoundation.org/offers. You'll just need to give your email address and you'll receive instructions on how to activate your digital subscription. Tomorrow we have Sudhir Vyas giving a talk on birding across borders. So Sudhir is he's retired from the Indian Foreign Service and he served various diplomatic missions across the world. He's going to specifically talk about birds south of the Indian border when you look south of the Indian Ocean. This is going to be at 5 p.m. tomorrow using the same Zoom meeting ID. With this, I'll hand it over to Bikram to introduce Ashish and start the talk.
Thank you, Kavi. You know, one of the great joys of growing old is to share the success of one's friends. And Ashish is one such friend. I have admired him for the work that he does, admired him for his work on historical books, on historical material, and of course, being the editor of Indian Birds, he's done a remarkable job of keeping the flag flying from people like Zafar Fateh Ali. But I really think his greatest contribution to the world of birds and ornithology has been his amazing bibliography. This bibliography was published as a fat book done by Permanent Black some years back. Ashish has now moved on to a digital platform and he will run you through on how to work the bibliography. I have known Ashish for several years. Besides serving the best vegetarian food on earth, he's a very genial fellow, and it's such a pity that nowadays, with this world of COVID, we can't meet as often as we would like to. Ashish has a lot to say. He's going to take us through his library. He's going to talk about old books. He's going to talk about his bibliography. So, Ashish, if you're ready, may I hand it over to you?
Yeah, Vikram, thank you so much for that introduction. I hope everybody can hear me. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. We can all hear you.
So I would like to take you through, I'm so delighted to take you through a small tour of my library. I've been collecting books since ever I can remember. And sometimes I think of myself as a child of books. But here we go. In this cupboard is the family silver, as I call it, much to my wife's detriment. But all the old works from the early late 18th and early 19th century are here. I'll slant the camera so that you can get a shelf view. You have the Fauna of the British India, both series here.
This is both edition 1 and edition 2, is it?
Yes, yes, both Blandford and Oates and then Baker.
Baker's, yeah.
And this is, of course, Stray Feathers, but this is the reprint edition that was printed by somebody in Delhi.
Yeah.
Then being a bibliographer, one has to collect every edition, which is a pain, but I've managed to do quite a few of them. This is Salim Ali's handbook, 10 volumes, first edition, second edition, and then the paperback edition. G.M. Henry's work. And of course, Legg's fantastic work on the history of the birds of Ceylon is not available in its original form and it's massively expensive. So there was a reprint some years ago, which I have a copy of. Then the 28 volumes of Peter's Birds of the World checklist. I was very lucky to get a whole set here only the first volume was reprinted, and I was able to get the first and the second edition. And then we have the Game Birds of India, Burma and Ceylon by Baker, and then Hume and Marshall, Nests and Eggs by Hume, all the editions, Birds of India by Jordan. Then the other works with Whistler's works, Handbook of Birds of India, Oates' Handbook of Birds of Burma. I'm just running through the titles. Then Smythe's Birds of Burma, which has a very interesting history. And this is the Birds of the Soviet Union, translated into English by an Israeli department. Salim Ali talks a lot about it in his handbook. And then the lesser other individual works of Salim Ali, Birds of Kerala, Birds of Travancore earlier, Birds of Sikkim. Then Vincent Ball's Jungle Life in India, EHA's Common Birds of Bombay, several editions, 14 editions of Salim Ali's Book of Indian Birds, Birds of Southern India, and the Pictorial Guide, etc. Then I have a larger shelved cupboard where the big books are. As you can see, at the bottom shelf has got a set of the Handbook of the Birds of the World and miscellaneous large size volume. Not all are birds. Sometimes, because of the size, I have to keep books on art here. Now I'll turn the camera, and this is where I keep all the modern monographs, all helpful in research with Indian birds if I have to look up something quickly. Here also there are some larger books, and because of the lack of shelf space, I have to fit them in here.
Buy some more shelves. Buy some more shelves.
Yeah, I know I have to. And this is the wonderful Stray Feathers set in its original bindings. I was lucky to get one set. I'll pull one book out and show you the...
This is in 11 volumes, is it?
It's, 12. The 12th volume was an index.
Index, yes.
I don't know if some of you have wondered why I keep some books in this position and some books straight. The easiest answer is that I can pull them out easier. Then there is a shelf full of world bibliographies. Then I have a small walkway sort of a library because, we had a narrow area with pillars and we built cupboards on this wall again so that the pillars were hidden. And since I've been collecting books, as I said, since I can remember, I was able to collect some old issues of the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society. And they are somewhere bound, somewhere still as they are, as you can see here.
Is your wife still talking to you?
Yeah, now she is, because I shifted the book out of the house, you see.
Okay.
Many of us book lovers and birders have fascinations for owls. So here's one made entirely of discarded nuts. These are all publications of the Bombay Natural History Society, whether it's the Hornbill or the Buceros, etc. I had a first issue of the journal also. So here I am holding the volume 1, number 2 of the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society, April 1886. It's a very slim book. And there's a volume 1 also. I'll just show you the, yeah, here we are. And it's from the library of
Didn't replay.
Yeah. Somehow, sometimes these books come up in the market and one doesn't know, but one is just lucky to get them. And I've arranged it in such a way that there are some shelves which are birds in general. So these are shelves of bird books in general, not so much about the South Asian birds. World checklists.
Do you have easy access to them, Ashish?
Yes, yes. What do you mean by easy access?
No, suppose you know you have to refer to a book, you know where to find it straight away.
Yes, I do. There aren't enough, as any bookseller, book owner will say, books.
Yeah,
there are not enough books ever. So these are all such shelves. Then I have a couple of cupboards on South Asian ornithology, which are all arranged author-wise, so that, as Bikram asked, I can get them easily. I've arranged everything by author, so it's easy to retrieve.
Oh, I can see some of my books.
Yes.
So how many books do you think you've got? Couple of thousands or?
I really don't know, Bikram.
I know. But it's amazing. It's certainly the best private library I've seen anywhere. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I have tried to collect unknown works or lesser known works, like the French guy called Guy Babol, something is research zoologics, and all those type of things which have notes on Indian birds so that I can index them. Then another one was called Khumbu Himal. Here you can see the book. And this was about a expedition into the Himalayas by the Germans, and lots of notes are there on birds. The journals go on. I've tried to collect every type of journal from India on birds. So I have entire runs of the newsletter for bird watchers, including original issues which are here in these folders. Then of course my dear Indian birds is there, all of it bound and together. Then smaller publications like the Birdwatcher Society's Pitta of Andhra Pradesh, Pitta, and the Madras Naturalist Society's Black Buck, entire runs of them. Cheetal, almost an entire run. You know, those were times when we bound books and kept them, later realizing you can't Xerox bound books, so it became a problem. Then all of Folktale, OBC Bulletin, and British birds and such things. Then a complete set of Sanctuary Asia. Vittu is always thrilled to see this right from the first issue. Then Proceedings of the Asiatic Society, which helped me a lot in my research. Ceylon Bird Club notes. Couldn't get all of them, there are so many. WWF's newsletters right from the 70s. Then I have sorry?
May I interject just to ask you, because a lot of readers would be interested. Do you need any kind of special air conditioning or something to preserve these books?
So the good part about where I live is that Hyderabad has this mild and dryish climate, which is very good to preserve paper. Unlike, our 4 major cities, which are all ports, Calcutta, Bombay and Chennai, the 3 major, which have major libraries too, unfortunately from the British times. And such a humid weather is the first enemy of paper. And if you visit those libraries, you'll see the condition of the books. It's
Yes.
just in a very pitiable condition. So here, what I've done is I just have a air purifier to
Okay.
prevent the pollution, and I have a humidity control thing, and that's about it. Air conditioning I have, but these are the two important things.
Okay.
And of course, keeping books behind glass so that dust doesn't get in. And there are smaller things where, the width of the shelf shouldn't be too much, the length, otherwise they sag under the weight of the books. And the height. So I've got adjustable glass shelves for the height of the book. So these are, I think I have a good collection on general natural history books, nature writing as they call it. And I've collected these, been interested from the time in early 80s when I visited Bharatpur and was able to buy collected works of Thoreau. And after reading Walden, etc., was really hooked onto the books, onto nature writing, and have collected whatever I could and read. So I have several of those. Then I started collecting a lot of ZSI's publications after the criticism that my book didn't have any ZSI literature, but that's another story. And thankfully now ZSI have put all their work, or almost all their work, as PDFs on a website, and one can, access them there. And I have some other interest sections on history and poetry, and another very dear genre is books on books, which I have here. So I read all these types of things. I also have retained my first computer, a Commodore 64, which I'll be talking about, and how we worked on in the early days on cards as indexing systems, and the old favorite typewriters that one worked with. So another part of the library is when I was indexing papers were not easily accessible. So in libraries, I used to go and Xerox as many of them as possible. And these are numbered serially and just kept in boxes. So even now through the bibliography, every entry has a number for the paper, and I'm able to retrieve the paper immediately if somebody wants or I want to access them. So yeah, that's a tour of the library. Thank you.
Congratulations. This is absolutely fascinating, and how a librarian mind's work or a bibliotheque's mind works. You've obviously upgraded to a better computer now. And so what now? Where do we go from here?
Well,
why don't you talk about your book first, Birds and Books?
That will come later in the talk.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to show a couple of things which people might be interested in. So Salim Ali left behind, he used to write in notebooks every night, and people talk about his the typewriter clattering in his tent in the field way into the night and early morning. And of course, he had this fabulous handwriting. I was able to get a set of his diaries, which are there in the Nehru Museum, Xeroxes of them. And I would just like to show you one page with his handwriting on it. I hope you can see it.
We can, thank you.
Page after page of such exact, lovely hand. And he had this habit of keeping one page for a species, and he just continued that as page number 1, page number 2, etc. And so, his life's, for a certain period in his life, the bird notes are there. And I have this old Jordan's work, which I'll show how I've kept it. It's wrapped in an old, well-washed dhoti of my father's. Natural cloth is the best to keep such stuff in. And then
this is Jordan's 50 Birds from Indian Ornithology, is it?
Yes, illustrations of 50 birds.
Yeah.
And it's wrapped in acid-free paper just for double measure. And you see how it was brought out at that time. So very thin paper cover, just a colored paper. And the contents are right here on the top in the year of publication. And, he published it in 2 sizes. He sold out so quickly that he published in 2 sizes, but I was not able to get 2 copies of the same size. So you can make out the difference here. So this is number 1, and this was the original large format, and there were 4 of them published. And this smaller volume, sized volume, has got number 2, 3, and 4 in this size. So each contained about 10 or 12 plates, and this he illustrated. And the great part about this work is that it was illustrated by Indian painters, native painters, whom Jordan himself trained in many ways. Just a minute. So it has got these fabulous plates. I'll be talking a little bit about this also in my talk. And I've tried to keep it safe with the rice paper in between, so that the prints, humidity does not get in and the prints are safe, etc. So Bikram, this is the old book I wanted to show you. 1843 to 1845 was the publication here.
I think it's also interesting because it has a painting of a pink-headed duck in it.
This work doesn't have, Bikram.
In the original 51 does have also one bird from Sri Lanka, that crimson-backed woodpecker.
Right.
But it still remains the most amazing. And it certainly was the first sort of formal volume to come out.
And just for information, large books I keep on a stand like this. Everybody in India know what it is, so that you don't, you have to take care of your books. You don't open them fully flat on a table. And this is a wonderful volume on Trogons that came out some years ago with lovely paintings, large size volume. So now we can go on to my talk, I think.
Yes, sir.
Just give me a minute. So I'll sign out of the phone.
Vikram, do you have a young hornbill behind you somewhere? I can hear a young hornbill.
There's one hornbill at the back just creating havoc since the morning here.
Yeah, I can hear the hornbill behind you.
I'm going to try and, till it recovers. I think it might be a little injured. So.
Yeah, 1 sec. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm glad that there are so many people interested in birds and books and bibliography. And I hope you take away something interesting from my presentation today. This beautiful poster is by my friend Rohan Chakravarti. It was commissioned for a journal that I edit. It's called Indian Birds. And this picture contains representatives of all the bird families that occur in India. Now, if I would ask you, point at a bird and ask you, what is this bird? You will name it. So the important point here is that you use a word which is a name to describe the bird. In another bird, the same thing. So names are markers for everything that we talk about in language, in English or in any language. Everything has a name, whether it's a wing, it's a name for something, or a pen or a pad or a car. All of them are names. I am emphasizing on names because I will come back to this, so bear with me a little bit. And over time, when bird watching became popular, people started observing birds and writing about birds. And this literature was published in books, and it was published in papers and journals, and it increased over time. The description of new birds and the observations of bird behavior and the way people behaved when they watched birds, all this has been published over the past 200-300 years of recorded ornithological history. So we are dealing with some of that here, and I would like to show you that everything is anchored on a name. This is what the great Linnaeus said, and as you all know, he was the father of the scientific binomial, the clubbing together of a name called the genus and with that of a species, so that you get this Corvus splendens for a house crow, and you are able, it is unique from every other species that occurs there, and it can be identified by those two names as a distinct species. Now, where have people stored all this information that they published in journals and in books? How do you get to them? There are thousands and thousands today. How does one get to them? So this is from the bibliography that I have compiled. And as you can see in the graph, from the late 1900s, the number of papers and books published on ornithology or on birds in general has just boomeranged, just shot up. Almost 16,000 papers in the 50 years from 1950 to 2000. And as I said, this is a huge body of literature. But how is to one find what one wants? If suppose I am doing research on a species, I have to look at what is already known. And where do I start looking? In a library, if one goes and the system and the cards are not in place, the library might say, okay, that is the birds section, you can go there and look. But that's not the answer. So I've tried to create something which helps people search literature and answer their questions. This is for South Asia. And if you see, this is the world situation. This graph was published in a lovely history of ornithology. The title of the book is given here. But again, as you see from the 60s onwards, the number of papers in world literature on birds has really shot up. So to bring all of this together, I chose the area of South Asia, and because that's where we live and that's those are the birds I'm interested in. And I made it a point to create a bibliography, a sort of list of everything so-called that is ever published on the birds of this region, but after 1750, that is after Linnaeus's system of nomenclature. Since that is considered to be the scientific period, I've done that here. I would like to talk to you a little bit about that. So the website is called SouthAsiaOrnith.in, and it's free for anybody to use. When you open the screen, this is the screen that opens, and as you can see, it's got a lot of information there. And how to use it. So when you go to the search terms, there is a field called author. There are three fields here: journal, author, or year. And you can search from any of them. You can type the term here. And there are two search items. So you can type a keyword here. Now the only limit that I told myself for this bibliography was that I would only use scientific names, because common names, English names keep changing all the time. Not that scientific names don't, but they are relatively more stable over time. So if you type in a scientific name for a species, you will get a search result. You will get a search result like this. You know, there are two that are showing up here, and about 10 show up on the screen at one time, and you can see multiple also. Now this show keywords, sorry, the show keywords is, if you click on this blue show keywords, you will see all the keywords that have been entered for this particular paper. If one were to see, because it's on the digital medium, it's easily accessible, but if I were to get it published, it would go into tens of thousands of pages, and it would become a difficult task. And you know, once you print a work like this, that up to that point the work is relevant. The very next minute it is irrelevant, because stuff is being added to literature all the time. And since I based my records on keywords, you can go to keywords and search whatever keyword comes to mind. So when the idea was, when a person is going to search for literature, suppose I'm working on the Taylor bird, then I'd like to know what literature has been published on Taylor birds. So I search Orthotomus sutorius, and that is the scientific name. I can search the database by family name, by genus, by the binomen, by places. The Taylor bird, I can say the Taylor bird in the Western Ghats, and only those papers which contain these two keywords will pop up, or by people's names, you know, Salim Ali, or by things like breeding, feeding. So Taylor bird breeding will bring up all the papers which have notes on the Taylor bird feeding or breeding, etc. I also have keywords like water birds or wetlands and habitats, to make it easy for you to search. Now the only drawback in this is, because one paper may have from 1 to maybe 400, 500 keywords in it, if there's a checklist from the Northeast or something. And in that paper, if the author is talking about 2 birds that are breeding there, then among the 400 birds, I will enter a keyword which is breeding. It doesn't mean that there are notes on all the birds breeding. It is just for that one. And that is something which you will have to work out when you look at the paper, which of the birds is breeding and whether that is the one you had wanted information upon. So this bibliography I was working on, and then it went online in 2011. And these were the statistics at that time. I was quite shocked to find out that it had 1.6+ million words. I had to actually make a document for Word, wait for half a day for Word to process it and see the word count in that document. But this is also from 2011, so things have changed quite a bit. And to put all of this together, there was just one typist. So when people ask me for my qualification, I always say I'm a typist. But this would not have been possible without friends, because I was computer illiterate. And so these are all the people, and I would like to give a shout out to them for helping me who actually put up the bibliography online. Now, I would like to go on to what bibliography is, what are the tools of bibliography and all that. So, what is bibliography? In its simplest form, as you can see, sorry, 1 minute. It's just a list of publications on any subject. It can be just any subject, aviation, it can be the sari, it can be on Bharatnatyam, it can be on any bird, particular bird or a family, and it could be annotated. By annotated one, you know, it has notes about what particular papers write upon, a summary of papers, or it can be descriptive. If it's a book, then how many colored plates are there, who are the artists. There is no end to that description. It's basically a geography of the book you are trying to give. Classical bibliography is just a geography of the book. You don't comment on the book, you just say this is present in the book. Now, why do we need a bibliography? So great bibliographers have had this to say. I'll stay with it for a minute so you read it. The importance of a bibliography, of course, cannot be stressed enough. Everyone who writes a paper or a book prepares a bibliography. But to do so, they first have to search for what they want. So when I began in serious, even I did not know what bibliography is or was. So I had to go back to school and start learning. And these were some of the books that I went through. The principles of bibliography, you know, how to describe how many pages, how to count pages when there are no page numbers in a book, but there are markers which say, you know, this is the first gathering, second gathering. And to know what a gathering is, I had to go to John Carter's ABC of Book Collectors, which has terminology of bibliography and book collecting, etc. One very important book not displayed here is, of course, on the art of maintaining and handling books, which is very important. Otherwise, books are fragile in a way, and if you don't, like I showed you, don't keep them on a cross or don't keep them properly wrapped in cloth, they tend to deteriorate very fast. So what are the tools that are required? Here is a picture of most of the tools one requires. The books or the literature, of course, that you will be indexing or bibliographing. You have some writing material. You have post-its for convenience to mark pages, etc. Now you have a magnifying glass. This is called a counter. Birdwatchers should be familiar with it when they go on census. On a census, they can, you know, press a button and count the number of birds. I use it to count the number of pages or plates in a book, and a ruler to measure the size of the book. Why do you need a magnifying glass? Some of you might be wondering. So in the 19th century and the very early 20th century, there was a form of printing called lithography, where every plate was unique in itself in each book. If there were two copies of a book and the same plate you looked at, both the plates were unique because they were painted at separate times. And it is something like the lost wax bronze process of the Chola bronzes. No two statues are the same because the mold was broken. There's no mold here, but there are different artists who painted. And those works became very valuable, those plates, and to identify, and of course anything that becomes valuable results in a gray market where counterfeit is sold. So to find out whether, a simple way to find out whether it's a genuine print or not is the use of a magnifying glass. What you do is you take the magnifying glass and go really close to the plate. Now, if it is genuine, you will see a watercolor wash like this. So the lithograph is, you know, this is an original. If it is a print, you know, printed in the modern process, you will see it pixelated like this. I hope it's visible on your screens. So I use that to good effect, and you know, most of the works I looked at were, of course, genuine, but it was a good experience to learn this process of bibliography. Then, a major part of bibliography is patience. This I must read out. Bibliography is a necessary nuisance and a horrible drudgery that no mere drudge can perform. It takes a sort of, note, inspired idiot to be a good bibliographer. Eliot Cowes was one of the greatest bibliographers that America produced, and he had this to say for it. So why do we do this stuff? Because accuracy is the cornerstone of bibliographic description. And so you count everything, every element in a book, the number of leaves, pages, illustrations, etc. What happens? While I'm doing it, midway the telephone rings, or worse, your wife calls and you have to drop everything. And when you return, you've forgotten where you'd left off, and so you begin again. And that is where the mechanical counter comes in use, and the post-it, so that I can mark a page and leave the number of pictures I've counted up to page 340 in a huge big tome in a library somewhere, you know. And now you also have mechanical counters as apps on smartphones, which you can use. One of the greatest bibliographers of all time, if not the greatest, was a gentleman called Charles Davies Sherborne. He was a British paleontologist and geologist, and he is considered a giant among bibliographers. And his magnum opus was called Index Animalium, which provided the bibliographic foundation for current zoological nomenclature. He spent 43 years on this work. He was considered a maverick. It was very cold, but he didn't bother about clothes, etc. He wore layers of clothes, one on top of the other. And if it was very cold, he wrapped a newspaper around his body and then wore the clothes on top of that. And the tie that you see here, which is tied in a knot, the biographer later realized was an old discarded umbrella cloth. So, Index Animalium, covering the years 1758 to 1850, was published in 2 parts. It had 19,000 whopping pages and 4,44,000 scientific names of every living creature on Earth. He used to sit in a library, pick up a book, and from page 1 to whatever page, every page he pored over, copied every single name it occurred the first time into a huge index card cabinet, which became just legend. It's been converted into digital format now, and I was lucky to be able to buy a set of his Index Animalium, the second part. It is just a feel-good thing that he worked on it, and this is the amazing work he did. And when at the end of it he finished his work, this is what he thought of himself. This is a cartoon he made of himself, and he says, "I don't know where I am." And in 2016, some people got together to celebrate 150 years of Sherborne, and they published a nice little volume called Anchoring Biodiversity Information. So in my search to and endeavor to build this bibliography, of course, I did not have all the material. I had to visit libraries and other collections. And some of the best times of my life were spent in libraries. So those, though a lot of literature is available online now as PDFs, and you have sites where you can get them, those who still go to libraries, if I may, I would like to say that you should familiarize yourself with the library using online information or email, or you may email the iLibrarian, and if possible, take a letter of recommendation, meet the librarian, introduce yourself to the staff, become a member of a library or institution if you foresee a long-term engagement. And the primary thing is to handle those books with great reverence and care, for after you, there will be others who will be using them, and you have to leave them behind in as good a condition as you found them. That said, here are some of the libraries that I sat and spent hundreds of hours in poring through the journals and recording them for a very, very long time in longhand, in notebooks and on pads. So we have the Asiatic Society Library in Calcutta, a great institution which has fallen on terrible times now. I have seen some horrible things happening there. The Babarnama open to sunlight on a miniature, so many things. Then there is the British Museum Library here. This is the bottom right is the Asiatic Society Library. I think this is the best among all of them. Of course, the British Museum is above at a certain level, but in India, this was the best library I visited. They have a basement full of the oldest of journals, and sorry, thankfully, the government, the Bombay Municipal Corporation, and several international organizations support it and the library is kept fairly well given the climate and temperatures and humidity in Bombay. Then good old Bombay Natural History Society has got a fabulous library, perhaps the best on natural history uh, in India up to a certain point. There came a time when they didn't have enough money to continue buying books, etc. And so up to a certain time, they did have a very good collection. And I think now they have again picked up procuring new books. So I truly believe that without libraries, we have no past and no future. The other tool that I would recommend strongly, as you have seen, I have done so in my life, is to collect your own books and create a library of your own. Sorry. Of course, you start with one book and from there you go on book by book. Books require space, paper weighs a lot. So if you have a space where you can keep books and you are fond of books, then I suggest you don't ever throw away a book. Just collect everything you can. You never know when it becomes a rarity or comes of use to you. So I tried to build a library and I collected every edition of every book that interested me. And as I did so, what I realized is, as one goes through editions, one sees what changes have occurred, sometimes not at the hand of the authors. And this came as a rude shock to me one day when going through Salim Ali's paperback editions. I realized that the consolidated index of the 10 volumes had been excised from the 10th volume. The hardbound volumes had a single index in the 10th volume, which encompassed all 10 volumes. Otherwise, if you had to search for a bird, you have to go from volume to volume to volume, unless, of course, you knew in which volume it occurred. But Salim Ali and Dillon Ripley had it clear that they had a composite 10-volume index in the 10th volume. In their own wisdom, the publishers of the paperback edition removed it, which I think is a huge loss to the literature of Indian ornithology. And the good thing about collecting books is that they are available to you at your own leisure. Not, you are not limited by the timing of a public library. So you can go through them at leisure. The other fifth tool of bibliography is, of course, the internet. And now the internet can be a double-edged sword, so you should be a little careful. You all must have heard of the story of Mullah Nasruddin, who was searching in his garden in bright sunlight for his wife's earring. And when people came and asked him, what are you searching for? He said, for my wife's earring. He said, where did it fall? He said, it fell inside. Then why are you searching here? So he said, no, there is more light here. So many times we search Google and think that is the end of the search because Google has all the right answers. Many times it does not. So it pays to research deeper, to delve deeper into it. And here are some of the websites that have genuine information, genuine journals and books in PDF format that one can use. And of course, as I say, take care you do not violate copyright, you take permissions for usage, etc. Now, the sixth tool that I have used is what I record for each. Now, you can record journals, you have books, you have pamphlets, you have grey literature, you have unpublished reports of institutions, you have travel reports. There are so many types of literature. Now, there are only documents and papers online, which have got something called a DOI number. So these are all to be indexed and listed in the bibliography. So what are the markers to identify a journal or a book, etc.? These are some of the markers that I record. In the book, what differs from a journal is, of course, where it is published, who's the publisher, the number of volumes, and which edition is it. And primary for both is, of course, date of publication. Now, just remember this, that the date of publication is very, very important in the publication of scientific material. Basically because of the principle of priority, where whichever new name of a taxon is described for the first time, that the date on which it is published or in the journal in which it is published is taken as the first date of publication, and that is accepted into science. Now to move on from here, as I said earlier, there is descriptive bibliography, and this is a page from my book. So what is it that you describe? As you can see here, you see the type of binding, the number of volumes, whether it has a dust cover or jacket or not, number of pages, whether they are Roman numbered or Arabic numbers, etc. You can see all the things here. So this is basically, this is from a time when libraries were few and far between, and people who wanted to research or know about books didn't have access to them easily. And to record that such books existed, people made detailed, very detailed notes about books and what the contents of the books. So books in the 19th and early 20th century were very valuable because they had, as I said, lithographs, etc. And the number of lithographs for in each volume was important. Whether new birds were described or taxon were described in any volume was important. And so all this data had to be recorded. So how did my recording system evolve? I'll just take you briefly through that. Now I work on a software called EndNote. This is the state-of-art online software where I enter everything. It's very easy to do and great. Before that, if you go backwards, I had something called Papyrus. Before that was DBase by DOS. Everything was typed into a black screen where white dots moved on the screen and it was just text. Before that was handwritten index cards, which I showed you in the library tour. And before even that was foolscap sheets for each species that I filed alphabetically in a binder. Now, I showed you this collection of Salim Ali's 14 editions of Book of Indian Birds. It's a fabulous affair. Every issue, every edition had an addition of a few species. So each book is unique in its own form. The earlier editions had got rounded corners. These are all small points, but when you look at the book and hold it, you feel that charm of the book. And it had full page illustrations of individual birds, unlike the composite illustration of 5 or 6 or 10 birds on a page later on. These are the tools that I would use. As you saw, the indexing card, the computer. Some may be familiar with this 8.5-inch floppies with I don't know how much, 80 GB or something KB of storage space. And this was a card filing cabinet. So the bibliography was going on well, and I was quite pleased with myself until one day I lost my work. So at the turn of the century, as you all remember, there were rumors about not clicking on stuff and your computer will crash, etc. And a dear friend of mine sent something which had a attachment, and when I clicked on it, the computer died on me. And you can well imagine this was another Hume moment when he lost his manuscript, and I was shattered for couple of weeks. And then, but I said, no, but I have done so much. There were earlier backups, maybe of 2 or 3 years old, but I have to do it again. So I resolved to do it again, and I treated this as every mistake is a lesson, as you know, and I built it up again. Well, I didn't feel very different from our friend. Now to get on to how I use the bibliography. So the bibliography is something that I work on every single day. It's an unending job. It's a drudgery, as you heard me say earlier, but it's also a great sense of achievement because one is able to put out there into the world information that is not available so easily, accessible so easily, searchable so easily. So and mistakes do occur. It's spelling mistakes occur, name mistakes occur. Those have to be corrected. So it's a constant effort. Now, how did while I was doing this and it's a boring job, how did I keep myself entertained? What are the things I was able to do with the bibliographic research? So while reading a paper in the journal of Bombay Natural History Society, it was written by, I think, Ticehurst, I realized that this work by John Ray was the first work that had a list of birds from India. And so I searched on the net, and of course, I found this work. And I think Vikram has shown this slide in his talks earlier. But here's a work of the lovely, lovely illustrations in that work by John Ray. And this was a checklist of birds from Chennai. There's a pitta illustrated here in this work, which I thought was lovely. So as I said, if you're fond of books, then the joys of bibliographic work are endless. One discovers stuff that is known, but hidden in tomes till they are opened and one finds something astonishing. And this was one of them for me. I was sitting in a dusty old basement of the Asiatic Society in Bombay. Hands were black, and this dirty journal was open in front of me, and this radiant plate just fell open, and there are two of these plates, and that is the pitta. And just to show to you how, I think I have this slide, how paint art has changed. Here is the same bird depicted by a dear friend of mine. Koke, he's an Hungarian artist, and he's a self-taught artist. The other thing that happened in my life was this. For want of a stool, in the Sikandrabad Club Library in Hyderabad, there are cupboards which have shelves which can't be reached on top. So there's a pile of books which was kept on the floor, and people were stepping onto those big books to reach the shelf. When the librarian came to know about my interest in birds, he said, "Sir, we have some very large prints." Now, when he said very large and did that with his hands, I realized there's only one type of work that could have been that large, and that was Gould's Birds of Asia, which I had occasion to see in the collection of the Bombay Natural History Society. So I jumped up and said, "Just show them to me." And my jaw fell open, my mouth fell open when I saw that the Sikandrabad Club Library held the original individual folios, 35 in number, of the Birds of Asia. Nobody knows, there's no record of who gave it to the society, where it came from. And over the time, of course, as is the nature of men, parts of the book disappeared, wonderful plates disappeared. So what remained, we were able to salvage, get people from the Salarjung Museum to restore the books, and now they are well restored and kept under safe lock and key. So this was a revelation that only through my interest in bibliography I was able to live. So who was this man called Gould? You should realize people talk about Gould's paintings and Gould's work. Gould was not an artist himself. He just had an eye for the pleasing aspect of a plate and made rough sketches for his artists. He employed a series of professional artists for his various folios. He was the right man at the right place at the right time, and he became a legend, with his illustrated volumes of birds from Australia, from Europe, from Asia. And I'll just give you a flavor of the works that he published. Now, as I worked on the bibliography, I realized that one has to establish provenance of everything that one finds. One has to go to the original source of the information, or else errors are perpetuated. One has to learn what is known and what is not known, and that bibliographic work never ends. One has to keep on updating their work to keep abreast of the times. Now, why do I tell this to you? Because this is a quote: do not believe something because it is in a great book or a sage has told it to. So go and examine it for yourself. Buddha said it apparently. So this is from a very well loved bird book of all places. And when I checked on the net, I realized that it was a fake quote. Buddha said much more than just that line. So I say this because some of you may recognize this picture from a book from India, and it is a checklist of birds by Ripley. And just see the number of mistakes one is able to find if one actually goes back and researches each and everything. He's got the year wrong, he's got the names wrong, and who described it first, what is the name of that person, which publication was it in. You know, there are so many mistakes. Now, nothing can be taken away from this wonderful work because it was done at a time when they don't have computers, they didn't have so many, such a lot of help, though Ripley did have help. But the fact does remain that literature, once a mistake is printed, that mistake perpetuates itself. And as bibliographers, we have a duty to try and search, trace, and rectify such mistakes. So, you know, it is hair splitting and fault finding, but that's part of a bibliographer's job. And this slide shows what can be done with it. Now, the other part is we have to understand what is known. Now, this is a picture of the grey hornbill, and we all have seen grey hornbills. But to my utter astonishment, I realized one day when I was watching them that the birds had different colored orbital skins around their eyes. And why is that so? And the color of the iris is also different if you look carefully. No literature from India had published this difference between a male and a female. And just because I noticed it, I went back to I had the literature and went and searched, and since nobody had published it, I was able to put in a small note in that, you know, BNHS's journal was gracious enough to publish. So over time, I was able to publish in many, many publications. The one on the bottom left is the 100th volume of the journal. When it celebrated its 100th volume, they published this centenary issue. And I had realized by then that the journal of the Bombay Natural History Society had never been dated. Now, this term dated and dating comes often and again in my talk, and it's different from the dating that we know. Here it's the dating of the, you know, when a taxon is described for the first time, the date that it is published on, this is the date we try to establish and work on. So the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society has had a number of new taxa described in its pages over the 100+ years that it has been publishing. And unfortunately, the regularity of the publication of this journal suffered quite a bit in the middle. So that if the journal was for a year, let's say 1930, it was published actually in 1934. When that happened, and on the journal, they said it's the year published is given as 1930. When that happened, people thought that the name that was described in that for the first time was from 30, but that is not the case. It was actually from 1934. So I listed all the journals. I, you know, did a complete spreadsheet of all the volumes, numbers, when they were published, who were the editors, etc. It was a nice paper that came out in the end. And that was the first time it was published. And the shocking part of it was how libraries deteriorate, and how if there is not a single person or a succession of proper librarians, how the literature disappears. BNHS at that time did not have a complete set of its own journals. I had to go from Humayun Abdul Ali's house to the Asiatic Library to actually work on all the journals. It was a sad state of affairs. I think now they have a complete set, but then I worked on a paper called a Dictionary of Scientific Bird Names originating from the Indian region. So names that, scientific names that, like, the Paria kite, Milvus migrans, Govinda. The Govinda has been taken from, it's of Indian origin. So such names I searched out and built up a dictionary here. And several other publications. I won't bore them. I think, how are we doing for time? I've overshot it.
You're fine, Ashish. You're fine.
Yeah, so these are things one can do, ultimately, and write more papers. And I'll talk to you a little bit about this Indian birds paper, which is from the work that I showed you, Jordan's illustrations of 50 birds. And here is about dating. So what is so important about dating? Even in the late 19th century, there was no way to establish the publication of a book. What does a book comprise of? What does it mean? How do you establish that, yes, this is a book and it has been published? So coming back to Sherborne, who was nothing but a bookworm, he went through every paper in every library he had access to, I think. He wrote this letter wherein he said to the editors of some journal that it is curious that, this criteria to systematically describe the geography of a book was published in Singapore, of all places. And he wrote in England that it is curious that we have to go to one of our smallest colonies and one yet in its infancy as regards printing and publishing in order to find such information registered. Information which in older countries is most difficult to obtain from want of a system which prevents the false dates often placed upon books by authors and by publishers and provides a record of value to every person concerned in a publication. Sometimes even today, publications come out without a date, where it is published, etc. Now, this dating issue came up in my bibliography when I bought a copy of Alan Hume's Nests and Eggs of Indian Birds, a rough draft. So, what I bought was this volume, this single volume. So it was a fat volume and it had so many 100 pages. And I was very happy with it that I got one of the rarest books in the world, etc. and sat with it. Then I have this bad habit of, bad because one ends up spending money, of trawling old book sites. And I came across one seller who said that he had 3 issues of the same volume. Now my ears pricked up and I wrote to him and asked, can you send me pictures, etc. Do you have the covers? So he said yes. And he sent me these 3 volumes ka photographs and all. And I snapped it up. I bought it immediately for nothing, almost nothing. When they came, I realized that each one of them was printed in a different year. What had happened, what still happens in some libraries is that when the set is complete, the librarian sends it off to a binder. The binder throws away the covers, binds all the pages together, and the last book's cover is put on top. And subsequent users think that that is the date of publication of the entire work. Here what happened was Hume published new taxa in each of the volumes. So you had 3 years, and still I published this paper. It was taken for granted that all the taxa that were published in this work were from the last volume, published in, I think, 1875. So in this paper, I was able to, establish that no, there were different years in which they were published, and a couple of those dates have actually changed in scientific literature today because of this paper. And I don't know, but I think I may be the only one holding these 3 volumes today, because I have not come across any library or any bookseller subsequently showcasing this. Then coming back to India, to our dear beloved Iha that we have read with such fondness. Edward Hamilton Aitken. He was a naturalist, and he wrote, one of the founders of BNHS, and he wrote in a style which was hilarious and loved by everybody. He wrote principally in the Times of India in columns, and later compiled a book called, his friends made him compile a book called The Common Birds of Bombay. This is a pretty rare work, and in its original form, and no one knew when it was published because a year was not published on it. Now, I had Salim Ali's version of it much later, and in that he says that we don't know when it was published. Now, as I said, I trawled booksellers' websites, and I tried to buy 2-3 copies of Iha's books whenever they came. So one day I landed up with this volume, and when it came, I was delighted to see, information comes about dating, etc., about a book from various ways. It can come through other work of other scholars, or it can come from a work itself through, interesting tidbits like marginalia and notes. And so here is one where this volume had a note in the hand and a signature of E.H. Aitken himself. And he was writing to somebody a happy voyage home. And it was dated 19th March 1901. So one can establish that it was at least published before that date. So this is the first edition, and subsequent editions came later on. Then a very interesting paper related to the thick-billed warbler came up in the study. What happened here was, it was thought that Jordan's paper was published in August 1845 in this Madras Journal of Literature and Science. And a month earlier than Edward Blyth's paper. Now, both gentlemen were working in 2 different parts of the country, and each didn't know what the other was doing. So both apparently found this bird and named it and gave it a generic name, and they published it. And till recently, everybody thought that Jordan's name preceded that of Blyth, and from just by 1 month, August 1845 and September 1845. But as I was going through literature, trawling through online sites and libraries, I came upon the original cover of the of this journal, and the date printed here is 1846. So, though Jordan may have given a description of the bird to the Madras Journal of Literature and Science in 1845, it was published a year later. So what happened? Blyth's name takes precedence, and for the thick-billed warbler today, from Phragmaticola, it has become Arundinax aedon. And both Phragmaticola and Arundinax mean reeds, where the bird occurs, inhabitant of the reeds, and aedon is taken from Greek for nightingale. So it's a nightingale of the reeds. This is the bird that we are talking about. Sometimes one tends to get delve deeper into a work if you own it. As I said, when you have a library, you have all the time in the world to look into things. And this is exactly what happened with Jordan's illustrations of Indian ornithology. Since I had the work, I went deep into it, and I realized as I researched online that he brought it out in 2 or 3 formats. So he had plates in one format, which are completely plain without any background, just the bird perching. Then in one plate, he had some background painted in, and then in a third book, some more background painted with a swallow or a swift flying here. And this happened through several plates in the book, with as you can see here with the pigeon, the leaf here in the background and here. And so that is the joy of it. You discover something, you sit and work on it, and you can see the amount of work one has to do, references, cross-references, and ultimately you come up with a publication that you are really happy with. So with all this happening, my bibliography had come to a point when, I thought, what is the point of keeping it to myself on a desk here when nobody can use it? What's the use of slogging day in and day out and, not sharing it? So I took the bibliography to users. In 1995, I published one by myself, a small book which had information from all the volumes of Stray Feather and volumes 1 to 90 of the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society. Just these 2 publications but it was quite a hit and people really liked it, and they still talk about it even today. And later on, in 2003, I put everything onto a disc and sold this disc to people at that time, and it was used and welcomed by a lot of people. And but I still had this feeling that, the world has produced, countries have produced so many bibliographies. Every country, so many countries have got bibliographies. Why can't India have a bibliography of its ornithological literature? There was one, and you see it here. There is one, this one, Ornithology of the Indian Subcontinent. And it was brought out by the Smithsonian Institute, primarily, I think, to work on the handbook and later on to the book that Dillon Ripley was planning, which he did not see the printing of, but which came out as the Ripley Guide, authored by Pamela Rasmussen. So they did this annotated bibliography, and Charles Berg, Bruce Beeler, and Dillon Ripley himself have their names as authors. It was an okay bibliography. It had not enough material in it, though it had some annotations about papers, but it had very limited number of references in it. So some friends of mine had started talking that, you should have a book. And in a dear friend of mine, many of you must know him, Ravi Singh, said one day that it's high time you had a book on the shelf. So I was in a dilemma. Had so much, 30,000 references to get into a book was impossible. Nobody would publish it. They would throw me out of the door. I would become bankrupt. So I hit upon the idea that let me include only books in this bibliography. That was manageable. So in 2010, this was published. In it were 1,700 books. It was 868 pages long, and at the end I was able to put in brief biographies of 200 plus ornithologists who were no longer with us. So, and who had published books. So there was criticism sometime later that I hadn't published so and so's because, those people hadn't published books. They had just published reports, etc. And they were not even in the public domain. And I was very thankful to Permanent Black for having made it possible. So, you might think that it's a journey all on my own, that I was able to achieve all these things, but I cannot leave here without mentioning the role of mentors. And I recommend wholeheartedly to amateurs that if you have a mentor that you can go to and talk about whatever your passion is, do not miss the chance, because a new world is revealed to you. And this fortunately happened in my life in sometime in the late in 2001, when I met Edward C. Dickinson. And it was a phenomenal experience to work with him. I still work with him, talk to him. And he is the author of these fabulous works. And he molded me, guided me, and showed me how this desire to put everything into a bibliography can be used into writing papers, doing research, etc. And as when the book came out, this fantastic work came out in 2014. It's a modern history of ornithology, and in it the authors say they list a few histories of ornithology that cover some of the work done in this field since Darwin. So they base their history starting from Darwin's time. And in this work, I was pleasantly surprised to see this listing. There were just 24 works listed there, and this was listed from South Asia. This was a great feeling it gave me, and I didn't even know it was there. My dear friend Sashi Kumar from Kerala pointed it out to me in a review of 10,000 Birds. So I would like to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite authors. And I believe this very, very deeply, that what we owe the future is not a new start, for we can only begin with what has happened. We owe the future the past, the long knowledge that is the potency of time to come. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this lovely opportunity. I'm sorry I overshot my time, but that's what passion leads you to do. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Ashish. That was very nice. And I'll give it over to Bikram now. Bikram and Kavi. And Kavi, can you show the few slides, Kavi?
Yes, sure. Let me just
Ashish,
show
just put your screen share off.
Yeah, one second.
He's got the question already, is he? No, wait, okay.
Yeah, but
Okay. Is my screen visible?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Ashish, thank you very, very much. It's absolutely fascinating. I had absolutely no idea that it took so much work, and what a wonderful job that you've done of it. Before I come down to the questions that we have, just something from me. There are other bibliographers. Do you interact with them? Do you, like Tim in Skip also has a bibliography. Do you share information? Do you pass it on and off, or how does it work?
So it's been a long time since I've spoken to Tim about bibliography, but I do follow some work that he does, and if he publishes a paper with a bibliography, you can rest assured I go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And I must tell you this, I don't know, I slipped up in the program, that in the beginning it was Tim who told me that, doing an odd sort of bibliography is pointless. You must index every single name of a bird in a paper as a keyword. Only then will it become useful. So I have sat and typed bird names, even in my dreams, in my sleep, my fingers keep moving, corvus splendens, house sparrow, this, that. And I've typed them, one paper had 400 names of birds. Checklists from the Northeast are humongously long. And I had to type all of them into, as keywords. And even PDFs were not available at that time, nor could we write to authors and ask them for, spreadsheets that you can copy paste into keywords. So that was Tim and Skip's contribution to this. He really drove me into doing it.
Well, with very good results, I must say. Ashish, somebody wants to know, can you explain the difference between sheets, leaves, and pages?
Yeah, sorry, Bikram, but do you want to do the question first, or shall we go ahead with these questions, the Zayas question?
Let's do this our questions first, and then before we end with it.
Okay.
What's the difference between sheets, leaves, and pages, if any?
So a sheet is the one that is printed upon by a printer, and then it is folded into 8 folds or 6 folds, 16 folds, etc., and cut. And sometimes when a leaf is now this is a leaf. It has 2 sides, but it has you can call this a leaf. And when there are numbers on either side, it becomes this page and this page. Page 1 and page 2. So that is the difference. Sometimes you have in the beginning of a book, there are pages which are unnumbered. Those are called preliminary leaves. So because they are unnumbered, you call them leaves. And in a book, when you open the book, so on your right hand is a recto page, and on the left hand is a verso page. That's also a description of the 2 different pages.
Thank you. There's a whole flood of people congratulating you on your talk, but among them, there are a few questions. Atul Jain wants to know how much of your talk is, if we look hard enough, available on the web.
How much of the?
Of your talk, or what the things you've spoken about, how much of it is available on the net if you search hard enough?
You mean the books?
Your books, papers, lithographs, paintings. I mean, of the work that you've done, a lot of that you did in libraries. Are those sources now available on the net?
So a lot of the work I have with me in the library, my source material you're talking about, I presume.
Yes.
Yes, a lot of it I have. And Most of it is also available on the net.
Most of it is.
Yeah, you have the what's it called, the Biodiversity Heritage Library and the archive.com. They have a huge number of books that are there from old books that are there scanned, and you can go through them, you can download them, and you can work on them from there. And whole sets of journals are there that you can go by date, year, volume, page, download whatever you wish, and use. So yes, but
Kavi Nanda asked the same question. So Kavi, I think you have your answer. But I think all of it involves hard work, doesn't it?
yeah, that it does, of course.
Um, a rather tricky question coming up. You see, there is a belief now that you don't go to the library anymore. The library comes to you. And there's a move in IITs and things to cut down the physical size of libraries. Do you think the libraries still have a future?
I certainly think so, because they are two different mediums, and the libraries, everything may not be on the net and everything may not be in a library. But as more things move on to the net, the very
Yeah.
value of a book in hand will go up. It will never become defunct, because they will become rarer, it will become more valuable. And the, what you can see in a high-end printed book in its physical form, you cannot see on the internet, on a screen. So
That's
my take on a printed book is that it will continue. It will not,
good.
libraries will not disappear.
A general statement more than a question is why are there more books on North Indian birds than on South Indian birds? Is it true? For one.
I think because tourism is more in North India. South India is just opening up to birding tourism since the past maybe 7, 8 years, 10 years.
No, but people like Jordan and all that actually concentrated on South Indian birds.
Jordan
They came from there. I mean, they did most of the working life
that's
there.
because Madras was the big place. Na? Everybody landed up there and started up either in the, everybody was in the army and they started up from there, and from Chennai, from Madras, they went up India to various other places. That's what even Jordan did. And he actually angled for places where, uh, he was not directly posted, and he got postings for himself to rarer areas,
Uh,
rarely visited areas.
A lot of people have asked the question. You already replied it. Where to look for uh, work such that you talk about on the net. While we're waiting for other questions, what I'd like you to ask you, just run us through some of that very interesting work you did earlier on the naming of birds. I mean, I think more than a bibliography, I think that was a fabulous piece of work that you did.
So I'll just get the volume. So this is the work that was published, and I got interested in names. I was very interested in the origin of names, the etymology of names, how people named birds, whether after people, whether after areas, whether after gods, goddesses, heroes. All sorts of names are there. And while working, I realized that there is a whole lot of names that have an origin as a word from the subcontinent, and whether it is relating to a place or a person or a, so I went into and listed all of them together and tried to find out their meanings, because some of them I still don't know the meaning of kundu, which is the name, the specific name of the golden oriole, Oriolus. Now it's the specific name, I think.
Yeah.
Oriolus kundu.
Oriolus is kundu.
Yeah. So whether it comes from somewhere in the western, the Tulu, whether it's in Tulu, it means something. I was given to understand it means mango in some language. So, it's
Very popular Bengali surname as well, Kundu.
Okay. No, Tulu is a language also, no?
Yeah.
So words like abuensis from Mount Abu, and some of them were quite eye-openers. Amandava, I didn't know it's a name for a corruption of Ahmedabad. And
There was Robert Sykes, I think, who named a lot of Indian birds. Yes.
Did that. Sykes did that, and Hodgson in Nepal did that. And you'll be surprised that there was a huge resistance to them. There were
Yes, there
letters,
were letters written against them that they don't
angry
need to.
letters saying that they are hijacking Latin and going into some other,
Yes.
hoodoo languages which nobody understands. And Hodgson himself replied very angrily. And then, the Brahma, Athene
Brahma,
Brahma,
yes.
that's from Brahma, the one of the Trinity gods. And then words used locally like Bringa for the paradise, or the racket-tailed drongo, Dichurus paradistes,
Yes.
Bringra. That's from Bringaraj.
Like his pitta from the Andhra word for bird, small bird.
No, from Andhra.
Pitta.
Pitta is called Punanki Pitta.
Hmm.
Pitta is a common generic word for bird in Telugu.
Right.
There are so many such, from the call of the bird it is there. And like the Kutias are named after the Nepali name. They call them Khutia or Khatia. So that's how that name came in. Then after people, Dharma Kumar Singh ji, or even the
His brother, Krishna Kumar Singh ji, there's a sand lark named
he
after him.
also, yes. And the word Krishna, also coined by Sykes for the Dichurus hottentotus. The old name was Aedolius Krishna, then it was changed later on. And I learned a lot of geography through these names because, things like, of course, Rangoonensis, etc. is quite straight away you can understand. But Saharia. Now, Saharia is the name of a place near Kolkata. And sunbird, Nectarinia sahariae, was named by Tickle after Saharia.
A lot of the work, these namings were done from Calcutta because that was the center of the British governance.
The
There's
library
a lot of
was
bengalenses in both trees and animals, mammals.
yes. So the library was there, the Asiatic Society was there, the collections were there. People were sending from all over India papers there. And in the paper, they used to write that if it is a new name and not yet named, if it is a new species not yet named, then I would like to name it thus. And if it was again published and printed in the proceedings, then that became the name of the bird or taxon, whatever it was.
There's lots of questions and we are running slightly out of time. So what I would suggest is if there are further questions for Ashish, will you please send them to the Delibird group and we will forward it to him and he'll be able to give you more information. Thank you very, very much, Ashish. I'll just ask Kavi to come down with one or two announcements on questions and things. Best of luck and God bless.
Thank you. All the best to you, Vikram. Thanks for this great opportunity.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you, Ashish. Like most of our viewers know, we have a partnership with Zeiss where we ask one question of the day. Whoever gives the correct answer, one person gets the opportunity to win either a Zeiss binocular harness or a Zeiss cleaning kit. In order to give your answers, you need to go to the Delibird Foundation website. Don't give the answers in the chat box. They won't be considered. Ashish, would you like to ask the question of the day to the viewers, please?
Yeah, we are all familiar with Alan Octavian Hume, but here's the question. Beyond the call of duty, A.O. Hume was passionate about 4 other interests. One was ornithology. What were the other 3?
Right. So if the viewers would like, you can take a screenshot or a photo of this slide. And we'll also post this on our Delibird Foundation Facebook page as well as the Delibird Facebook group. I'll just post the link to the Delibird website where you can submit your answers in the chat box. Just give me 1 second. Also, one more announcement is that Delibird Foundation's YouTube page is now live. So all recordings of the previous talks, as well as the recording of this talk, will now be available on the YouTube page. So request you to go to YouTube, search for Delibird Foundation and follow our page over there. Tomorrow, we have Sudhir Vyas doing a talk on birding across borders, looking south in the Indian Ocean. This will be at 5 p.m. tomorrow using the same Zoom meeting ID. That's it from our end. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Ashish, for this wonderful talk. Hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
See you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.